It's a game that we play. No one's safe. Maximize all the pleasure, even with all this weather. Nothing can make it better. Maximize all the pleasure.
All right, I'm Isabella,
And I'm Karen.
And I am Taya.
and we are from Music Marmalade, and today we are going to be discussing Toro Moy's new album, Outer Peace.
So, Taya, we'll start with you. What were your initial thoughts of the album?
I really like the album. It's sort of like this dance, sort of electronic album that I feel could appeal to a lot of audiences, especially now where there's a lot of EDM music on the radio and stuff. But there was some pretty deep lyrical content, I guess, in the song. For my track of the day, I wrote about the song Freelance, and it's sort of about the internet and how it's a great tool, but it's also kind of dangerous, and how it's okay sometimes but not okay all the time. And there was a cool 90s rave beat section in it that was really cool. So it's there's a lot on this album to talk about, I guess. A lot of different influences.
Yeah, I personally really liked Freelance as well, especially because he one of the first lines of the song is talking about walking on water, so obviously a reference to a biblical time, and also overcoming and doing things that seem so impossible to do, and taking what you want to do that seems impossible and then going ahead and doing it anyways. And I think that's one of the biggest things that he's trying to voice on this album.
Definitely.
For sure. And what I really liked about it was how experimental it was. He definitely blended a lot of genres. I heard a lot of house, club, pop kind of music. There was a little bit of I don't want to say mainstream vibe to it, but there were definitely times where mainstream kind of was brought into it. So I liked how he brought everything together, and he was trying out different things. And even through the experimentation, which sometimes can make things a little jumpy, I thought he made it flow very well, and it wasn't too inconsistent,
Yeah, for sure. I did read online actually that his last album, Boo Boo, he was originally supposed to go on tour for it, but he didn't end up doing that. He ended up going to nightclubs and playing it as a DJ set instead, and that I heard him say on the interview that he really liked this experience a lot better. It's very different than performing at a concert. It's a lot more intimate with who is there listening with him. And it's really clear that he wanted to kind of speak to a more intimate audience on this album, like he did with that experience at the nightclub when he was performing.
Yeah, that's definitely something really interesting about the album, and you can really see the influence. Because it is a dance record, but it's also an album that you can just listen to in the car and chill out to.
Yeah.
One experience I had with this album that I really liked is I was in the car with my friend, and I had it playing in the background. And her and I do not listen to the same music. Very rarely do we listen to the same music.
Right.
And she was shocked that she liked something that I was playing in the car.
That's so cool.
That was something really cool, and that I think a lot of people could enjoy about this album. It's a dance record, it's a fun record, but there's also, like I said earlier, some deep stuff contextually.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I personally really loved the album. When I first listened to it, I listened to it so many times that I just had it on in the background while I was cooking, had it on in the background while I was doing homework, outside of what I actually had to do to make this album review and these roundtables. And it was really fun for me to experience it, because I don't necessarily listen to this type of electric music on a regular basis, so it was really nice to kind of put that in my schedule and experience it for what it is.
Yeah, because it is an easy album to listen to.
It is.
Yeah.
This is probably one of the easier albums we've had to listen to so far, and I liked how he kind of blended technology into it.
Yeah, I did actually find a quote that he said, he says, is technology is allowing people to become creative at home and become almost like entrepreneurs from their desks. I felt like this is that's who I wanted to connect with, the people who are grinding behind the computer in a creative way. So it's really obvious, especially with his song Freelance, that he's directing this album to people who are freelance artists and who are working behind the desk and who, you know, just start off with their computer and the programs that they have on it, and they're creating something with it, and they're becoming their own entrepreneurs with that. And I think it's really a time of technology, because you don't have to have an instrument to play to be able to create music.
Yeah.
And I also found something online that he said on an interview, that he actually used his iPhone to record sounds that he used on this album. So he gave the example of going up to a crosswalk and recording on his cell phone a little beeping sound while you're waiting to cross the road. And he uses that, and then in post-production he'll change the rhythm or he'll change the tone of it to make it fit with the song. And I think that's so cool that you can take things from the everyday and just put it into something completely new.
Yeah, definitely. It's really, it's definitely a very modern album.
Yeah,
that
for sure.
Modern musicians can understand. Now people from all walks of life are making music, whether they have the ability to physically play an instrument or just like, you know, some sort of sound mixing program on their computer. Everyone can do it, and it's what you do with that medium, I guess, is a true testament of your talent, not necessarily if you can physically play an instrument. So I think the experimentation is really cool, but it doesn't make it, like we said, it's an easy album to listen to, but it doesn't make it like too weird, you know?
Right.
It makes the experimentation make sense, you know?
Yeah,
accessible.
And one thing that I was thinking when I first listened to the album, I don't know if you guys ever listened to the song "Breaking a Sweat" by Skrillex, but there's like a little section in the middle of the song where he plays this interview where this guy is saying like people are using machines and like computers to make music now, and it's like people tend to think that it's easy to do something like that, but it's really not.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this
for
album
sure.
embraces that
For sure.
Yeah,
For
and
sure.
I was gonna say something.
Yeah, I actually found that Tori Moy uses digital scatter in a lot of his songs.
Yeah.
So like at the end he'll kind of like do a retro technology that almost sounds like it's rewinding and like it's glitching. It reminds me of like a VHS player when you're waiting for the whole movie to rewind backwards back to the beginning. And I found that was really interesting, to have kind of that more like retro but also modern technical aspect.
Juxtaposition of the two. Yeah, and something I also liked about this album, there were times where it did, maybe because it was like an electronic like album that had tons of beats and stuff, but I was kind of almost waiting for like a rap verse to come up, or like a hip hop something, and it never happened, but I wasn't disappointed. It was just something else was there to replace that, so it kind of changed my expectations of the album. I'd never really listened to Toro Yumoy before. I'd heard of him, and I thought that maybe he would have like a hip hop or like a rap on his music because of because a lot of electronic beats are used for that genre. But I definitely wasn't disappointed when there wasn't a hip hop or rap verse there. But it is really interesting how that could have easily have been done, but it wasn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I talked about that a little bit in my track of the day. I reviewed New House, and
Love it.
I loved it. It was honestly probably my favorite off the album. And what was interesting is in an interview with NPR, he was saying, because in the song he used auto-tune with his voice, and he was like, I've always been afraid to attack something that's so simple because everybody's using autotune nowadays. But he said, quote, to me, that recipe was always like, that's cliche. But to take those cliche elements and try to do something fresh with it was the challenge. And I really enjoyed that, unquote. So that's what I liked about it, was how he knew that he was doing things that were kind of everyone's doing it. But to bring it in to something new, that's what I thought was really cool, especially about that track. I didn't hear very many songs that had like that mainstream auto-tune to it, but when he did bring it in, it wasn't like, okay, here we go, this is another auto-tune song. I don't know if you guys found any of that in your tracks of the day.
Well, that's something that I really liked about it. There are a lot of artists today who are using auto-tune for different reasons, not because their vocal abilities aren't there, but they're using it more for effect.
Yeah.
And he is a perfect example of an artist who does that as sort of like as someone would use like a guitar pedal on a guitar just to change how the tone sounds a little bit.
Exactly.
It doesn't necessarily change like the instrumentation, it just changes what listeners receive out of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's such an interesting aspect to add to what you're listening to, especially because you're adding all these electronic elements to it, but there's also a lot of traditional instruments in there as well. I heard maracas and bongos and pianos and a lot of like exotic type of instruments. But yeah, I find that it's really interesting that there's a lot of electronic elements that are mixed in with traditional instruments such as maracas and bongos and pianos. Along with, I heard some experiments with the xylophone and Laws of the Universe with electrical whammies that really echo different types of bass. Along with the song Miss Me, there was maracas in that with an exotic bass that was deep enough to charm a snake.
Nice. Yeah.
Which was really interesting because it really ties in some kind of natural element, especially with Miss Me also had birds chirping in the beginning, and it was almost like a lo-fi like playlist that you'd find on YouTube with like, you know, like things that you listen to in the morning with birds chirping, like that kind of scenic thing, but also mixed in with the electrical whammies and like the xylophones and things like that.
That was another thing that I like too, the juxtaposition between like these more like traditional like natural instruments that we need to physically play and the sort of electronic super produced elements. Like, isn't it Ordinary Pleasure? Doesn't that song start out with bongos and then it immediately goes into like some weird like bass like synth thing? And I love that because I think it was a perfect, it kind of shocks you a bit. You're kind of waiting for a build and it doesn't build, it just sort of jumps ahead right into that
for
verse.
sure.
And that's another one of my favorite tracks on there because subjectively, like he sort of is questioning like pleasure and love and if it's worth it and people, you know. I
actually wrote about that that song for my song of the day, and I read a couple articles and they were saying he was talking about the digitalization of relationships and how relationships are online so much nowadays that they're easy access and, you know, you can just get whatever you want whenever you want, but then you lose kind of the special attachment that you get from learning a person and their ways and like learning about someone.
Like a physical.
And something else that I read was this really ties into his new marriage. He recently got married, and that relates to how, you know, he might have a different outlook on love.
Yeah, definitely. Sure. No, yeah, that is a standout track.
Yeah,
and that all definitely relates to it. Yeah.
For sure. And what's interesting too is some of the songs on here, like Ordinary Pleasure, he has been known as a chill wave artist, but that album was like, there were definitely songs that weren't like making you like chill. It makes you want to get up and like move around, right?
Yeah.
And he said in an interview with complex.com, he was saying, quote, "I'm very thankful to be looped into chill wave. I see how to, but I don't relate to the genre too much. I'm glad it took off and did its thing," which is interesting because people think of him as a chill wave artist, but he says, I don't really relate to that genre anymore. But then he says in the same interview, "I do believe in blurring the lines between genres, and it's sort of my favorite thing to do. I feel like it's kind of cool to just keep pushing the boundary a little bit." So it's interesting. He's known as a chill wave artist, yet this album is almost anything but chill wave.
And I respect that no one wants to hear an artist make the same album over and over again, and that's a true testament to the artist being an experimental artist and wanting to make new things and not necessarily make something that they know will sell.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with that, and I feel like especially with his cover art that he has for the album, it's him sitting on a exercise ball in front of his computer. It really shows the experimentation that he plays with in his music, as well as encouraging freelance artists to really like dive in and not be afraid about what's impossible, but just see what they can make.
Definitely.
I think that's one of the biggest themes of the album.
For sure. Did you guys have any like closing thoughts on the album?
Listen to it.
For sure.
It's great.
Listen to it while you're cooking, while you want to dance, while you want to chill in the car.
It's good for, you can play it any time.
Basically,
maybe if you're not sad, but though if you're happy, if you want to be happy,
Yeah, there you go.
You want to dance.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm Isabella,
And I'm Karen.
Taya.
and we will see you guys on the flip side.
Pleasure, even with all this weather, nothing can make it better. Maximize all the pleasure, maximize all the pleasure, even with all this weather.